And it looks like we are filling up with people. We've
That's
got Alita joining us once again, and
we know
Bob
what's happening.
Sutherland. Awesome. Good to see Bob. Gloria Main. It's on. Jim and Charlotte Havey have joined us. Lynn Ross Bryant. Eric Roth. Douglas Conley. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you for our follow-up conversation on the Party of Practicality here on a beautiful day in Boulder, Colorado in November. Although I have no idea, everybody else is spread all over the place.
Sort of a cool aspect of this. So, so we'll not start with our list of with our slide until what, 2 or 3 minutes in. Is that right?
You just let me know, Patty, and I'll pop it up there.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, everybody, welcome. This is going to be, we hope, a very consequential moment for the Party of Practicality coming into its own here. It's about time. Waiting a bit for that. So it is now 12:01. So what do you think?
I think we can go ahead and get started. I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. First of all, I wanted to thank the CU Latinx Law Student Association. We will see a couple of their members, Anthony Vigil Martinez and Tomas Manriquez Hernandez, later on during this conversation. They were our co-sponsors on this, but our real convener was a Center of the American West board member, Lorenzo Trujillo. And I believe I just saw his name flip through in the room. So Lorenzo, thank you for everything that you've done to make this these two events occur. It's been essential. He was also instrumental in our past conversation having Congressman Joe Neguse participate. So very thankful for that. And I just wanted to give a heads up. If you are not part of our mailing list, I urge you to go to www.centerwest.org and join that mailing list. You will hear about all of our upcoming events and Patty's blogs that she's doing now weekly. But we have an event a week from today called What It Means to Disagree, Admit a Degree of Uncertainty, and Maintain a Robust Friendship, a Dialogue. It's next week, Friday, same time, 12 o'clock, just to 1 o'clock on that one. And it features the Center for Humanities and the Arts, Jennifer Ho and Patty Glimerick in conversation. And hot off the presses, we have an event that's not even yet up on our website on December 18th. It's a conversation Patty will have with the former chairman of the Colorado Republican Party, Dick Wadhams. So please join us for those events if you have a possibility, if you can, and please sign up for our email list. And I will turn it over to Patty and the rest of our crew. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kurt. And thank you to all the center team for figuring out how to engage in this form of communication in this interesting time. We are really, really happy to have this opportunity. And I want to begin by making some remarks of how the spirit that we are wanting to bring to this. So, very divisive time in the nation's history. And one option in confronting really divisive times would be to sharpen our sharp sticks and pitch into the whole fray. We're not doing that. We're going a different direction entirely. We're taking the stance that this is an optimal time to try for a different spirit. And we feel we have a topic that, especially with the first couple of propositions we'll be putting forward, is really supportive of this notion that we need not be at each other's throats. We can be recognizing areas of agreement and common cause. So that's the vision. And in a moment or two, I will show you that this is actually not a pipe dream. This is not a pie in the sky thing. This has really got a grip. So we began in October with our first forum, and this is our second. I was really fortunate last night to be on a program with Congressman Neguse, and he was with us for our first visit. He is a person who is very eager to move forward in bipartisan ways on this issue, and he received from me last night the news that we would be back in touch really, really soon with some plans, and you'll get to see that. So attendees, please, please, please use your comments. Use the Q&A to give us any coaching that you think would be helpful to us as we take on this cause. So I am going to do something insufferable here, and I'm going to read from my Denver Post column that will be out this weekend to give you that sense of the attempt at just absolutely overpowering good-heartedness that we are taking up today. And we have other people in the country who are taking up the cause of good-heartedness, but we are kind of leading the parade, we hope, on that. And well, okay, so here is what I will say in the Denver Post soon. Begins a little bit with gloom here. There are reasons to believe that the 2020 presidential election is tearing our nation in two. And there are also reasons to believe that Americans hold the power to refuse the rupture and to seek alternatives to anger and frustration. Then, when you see this piece, you'll see that I do a little inventory of the divisions in the post-election world and have finally the item. I know that there are millions of Americans who may or may not have voted, but who have given up faith and lost their trust in the premises, provisions, institutions, and processes of a democratic republic. So that is our modest goal today. We're just going to take care of that. We're just going to really say, try it again. Don't walk away from this national enterprise. Try it again, and try it with our subject of immigration reform. So I will just read a tiny bit more. It is my belief that we have the possibility, one with wisdom and practicality, that in every possible civic forum, we could meet with each other and listen to each other to identify the arenas where adjustments in the workings of our democratic republic should come up for rethinking. We could join together to imagine the changes that might promote greater trust in our institutions and in each other. I don't know. It sure seemed worth a try. And if I ever wanted two teammates who would try this with me, and if I had sat and made a long list of the characteristics and qualities I wanted in those two teammates, couldn't have done better here with the people I'm about to introduce, plus the two young people who will be joining us soon as well. So I would like just to say a word of introduction really quickly. Professor Mary Mendoza is a professor of history at Penn State University. She's an historian of the US-Mexico borderlands, the environment, and the history of race relations in the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries. She is at work on a book called A Natural Border, Race and Environment at the US-Mexico Divide, which explores the relationship between the natural and the built environments along the US-Mexico border. And so when she speaks to us today about the reasons to reconsider the building of structures to constrain movement on the border, we really have an expert here with us on that. So then, moving along to next introduction, I'm really lucky to have, well, I'm really sad that I spent a good share of my career not being aware of the work of Tomas Jimenez at Stanford University. I don't know, something benighted and dark phase of my life where I didn't know that. But then fortunately, a few people organized conferences and events where I got to know this person. So I'm out of darkness now. I am into the light. This is Tomas Jimenez. He is professor of sociology and comparative studies and race and ethnicity at Stanford University. His latest book is The Other Side of Assimilation: How Immigrants Are Changing American Life. And I just accent that because that's one of those things where all of us for years went after, what does assimilation mean for the immigrants and the new arrivals? And it was really Tomas reversing that and saying, what does it mean for the pre-existing population to have those folks there? So it's a very excellent, fresh approach to seeing the two-way or three-way or four-way interplay by which assimilation changes both the established individuals and the immigrants. His first book was Replenished Ethnicity, Mexican Americans, Immigration, and Identity. So those are my teammates, and we'll get to our two younger people later in the program. And now I'm going to do something that is so excellent as a form of communication. We are going to put up a slide. It'll be just like you're in a regular old pre-pandemic era where you're going to public audience and there's suddenly a PowerPoint, except there's not a PowerPoint. There's just this one slide. So what we have here, ladies and gentlemen, is you'll see this now for just a couple of minutes. Well, I'm moving through it very fast because that's the whole point of our program, is to explore these things that you will see up here on the screen. And then this will come back up at the end. So this is the Party of Practicality, the group that we now calling ourselves here. And we are coming in for a landing. So what you see on this slide is where we have arrived in our thinking about the possibilities and prospects for serious improvement in our nation's policies on immigration. These are not pie in the sky kinds of things. They're very, very practical, and I think they are within our reach. So just the quickest review here, the dreamers, the folks who were brought as infants and toddlers and young children into the United States to revitalize the DACA program. And we have a proposal that is very concrete and very down to earth about that one of the law students working with us will put forward. We would also like to have we'd like to recommend that people who served our nation, immigrants who do not have legal status, will have that to ensure citizenship for veterans. These two items we think we're calling them the low-hanging fruit, that those are two things that people of goodwill and love of their nation would see really reflect American ideals in a very significant down-to-earth way. So we have those two proposals. Then we have this bigger picture item of recognizing the ineffectiveness and the burdensome expense of border structures that claim that they will, the proponents of that will claim that that will really change the patterns of migration. And we can look, with Mary Mendoza's help, we can look at what has worked in the past and what has not, and structures not very effective and really expensive, really burdensome in ways that no one can say this is a great way to use national resources when there are so many demands on those resources for other purposes. So reconfiguration of enforcement priorities, who to go after, who to send the feds to check out, and who to simply recognize are actually very significant contributing members of society, and how to change the priorities and enforcement in that direction. To the fourth point here, to build on things that are underway in a number of American communities, to have not an immigration policy, but policies towards immigrants that in fact further the interests of everyone in the community. To take the resources now that the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services has been told to focus on naturalization fraud, and to take that money and the personnel and direct that to, in fact, citizenship and inclusion and integration, rather than prosecutions of naturalization fraud. To create an equitable framework for immigration proceedings, so that in fact those proceedings have a much closer bearing to how justice proceeds in courtrooms under other circumstances, with a proper hearing of evidence and fairness and equity in decisions. To keep the focus on integration and the ways in which people are actually historically in the past moving into American society and contributing to it. Then here we get to our big spirit issues here, to transcend the assumption that there is an intrinsically bitter split in the American population over the issues of the integration of dreamers in particular, of veterans, but also of people who are making very significant contributions to our economy and our well-being. Then we get this better spirit after the 2020 presidential election to really rethink the usual categories of political affiliation. And here Mary Mendoza will be really leading us in the very widely discussed issue of what is this category of Latinos, and what are their political affiliations, and how can we be more realistic in recognizing that. Then this was one I just put in because it does seem important as the presidential succession takes place and a new president comes in. How much is the executive order the right way to proceed on some of these recommendations, and how much should we in fact still be trying to think of collaborative bipartisan legislation and from Congress? So the slide could go away now. Bye slide. We'll see you at the end. But everyone who is in our audience now should be feeling quite grounded, should be thinking, oh, this is not just some people wishing, dreaming, imagining. This is really some things that could happen. And I believe that. So I'm going to ask my two comrades here to speak for a few minutes, just to get the prelude started here on this different spirit that we might be bringing, not fighting old battles, not recriminations, not accusations and condemnations of things that went awry in the past, but really starting forward. And I do want to say again that Congressman Neguse is, last night, kind of standing by and eager to hear about this. And also we feel that Senator Michael Bennet, who was a major leader in a project in 2013 on behalf of immigration reform, that in some ways we are very much building on his work, so that we think we'll have his interest as well. So this is really pretty grounded. Okay, Mary Mendoza, would you raise our spirits?
Well, I hope that I can do a little bit of spirit raising. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks so much everyone for attending this event. It's really a pleasure to be here and to see so many people interested in this topic and ready to engage in this conversation. I want to start today not by talking about what I study so much academically, but really, I actually just want to talk a little bit about my personal experience, which is to say I am a Mexican-American woman. I'm a first-generation college graduate, and definitely first-generation postgraduate education PhD. And so that gives me a little bit of a kind of firsthand experience with, and I should say, I grew up in South Texas, which is a state that generally votes very Republican. And I generally don't talk about my own political affiliations and expose that part of myself or even my family. But I think here it makes a lot of sense to do that. And I actually recently wrote my own column. Patty just talked a little bit about what she will be publishing this weekend. I published one in my own local paper this week, just yesterday, about my family and how I grew up in South Texas. My family, Latinos, Mexican Americans, actually are all Trump supporters. They're Republicans, and I tend to be much, much more on the far left. And there are reasons for that. And I have struggled as I've grown up and become more and more left-leaning to understand how it is that Latinos who came to this country, my grandfather, without sanction, he was an unsanctioned migrant in his very young years, how they could support a party that generally opposed immigration, unsanctioned immigration from Mexico in particular, when my family's migration story is precisely that. And then I started studying history, and I learned the nuances of people's lived experiences. And I began to understand how my grandfather, who got his citizenship after fighting in the Second World War for the United States, became American in this really interesting way, where he felt this strong camaraderie for the folks that he fought with and serving the United States. And he became very strongly American and really valued that and raised his children in that way. They were Catholic, and all of these identities became really, really important to my father and his father and my aunts and uncles. And that's how they sort of became pretty conservative Americans, even though they were Latino. And recently, a colleague of mine, Geraldo Cadava, and I'm going to spell that for you, Geraldo, Aldo, sorry. Oh, there it is. And Patty's showing it. She has it ready because she knew I was going to mention it. Just wrote a book called The Hispanic Republican, and he talks about the ways in which many Latinos are in fact Republican, and there are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are one-issue voters. They vote because the Republican Party is pro-life or anti-abortion, and they really value that as a part of perhaps being Catholic, or maybe they vote Republican because they're anti-immigration and they're interested in controlling the US-Mexico border, because when new immigrants come, they compete for the same jobs. And if Latinos or Mexican Americans and they're working with American documentation because they're American citizens, Mexican immigrants can come in and work for lower wages, and they're competing for the same jobs, right? And so that's really tricky. And so they might oppose new immigrants coming in, and there are reasons for that, right? And so it becomes really complicated and nuanced. They might vote Republican for a whole host of reasons. And so, and Jerry, who wrote the book Hispanic Republican, is a friend of mine, gets into that even more than I am right here. But I started to understand that more and more and more as I got older and as I studied history, and I learned really there is no one monolith. And we tend to do that no matter what side of the political pendulum we tend to swing. And really there is no monolith. People speak about the Latino vote and say, the Latino vote, oh, we have to get the Latino vote. They tend to be Democrat. But really, there's no one Latino experience. They all have many, many, many different diverse experiences, and they're going to vote in really different ways. And that explains perhaps why Donald Trump actually got more Latino voters than the second time around than he did the first. And that's a really interesting thing to think about and study. Or Democrats will say, oh, the African-American voter. The African-Americans are definitely going to all vote Democrats. But there are certainly some African-Americans who didn't. And Democrats do the same thing. They say, oh, people who voted for Donald Trump are monsters. If they voted for Donald Trump, they are enabling a racist, and so they too are racist. But you have to really think about what you're saying when you do that, because you're calling some African-American people and some Latino people racist, and that's really a complicated thing. And so what I actually am thinking about and asking everyone in the nation to do is to pause and think about how people are voting and why they're voting in particular ways, and give people the benefit of the doubt to say, well, if they voted for Donald Trump or they voted for Joe Biden, they're doing it maybe not because of the person himself or herself, but because they see that person as a path toward creating policies or enacting policies that they believe will make the world a better place that fits within their worldview. So I'm going to take my parents, for example, and say they voted for Donald Trump twice. And yes, for me, a far, far, far left-leaning person, that was hard to swallow. But my parents also admit that Donald Trump is not a beacon of holiness, but they see him as a person who will, for example, put justices on the bench, that will support really conservative policies that my parents believe will make the world a better place in the long run. And so if I can pause and say, I give them the benefit of the doubt, then maybe, and I ask all of you to do that, then maybe we can find middle ground as the party of practicality and move forward on a path to recovery as a nation, and come together and think of some policies like the ones you just saw on the slide that will help everything to get a little bit better. I'll stop there for now.
Let's say, so this is a new problem in moderation, which is weeping over the, okay. I do have a handkerchief here, which I must bring up here. That does not happen every day. And I moderated it, did not cry at fracking sense. I'm going to say, when we did the fracking issue, I never once wept. So, okay, Mary, congratulations. But I do want to say, ladies and gentlemen, that was quite a big thing. What Mary just did there was really an extraordinary thing. And I'm very privileged to have such a friend. And so, okay, so privileged to have friends. Goodness, that's the theme here. So, Tomas Jimenez, let's hear your opening remarks.
Thank you, Patty, for having us back. And Mary, thank you for sharing what is clearly a very moving personal account. I want to echo a lot of what Mary said. I think that presidential elections, more than any other moment that we encounter, kind of lead us to distill each other into very crude categories as either, in this case, a Trump supporter or a Biden supporter. And I think more generally, we are prone to draw each other in caricatures in ways that are really dangerous and antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish here. And so I think part of what we're asking is to quit drawing each other in caricatures. And Mary is certainly exploding some of those caricatures with her own family account. And I actually think what Mary offered is reflects a larger theme that I've seen in my own experience and in my own research. I'm finishing a book with a political scientist and a couple social psychologists that looks at Arizona and New Mexico. And these are states that have taken radically different approaches to immigration policy. States have gotten really involved in immigration policy making in the last 20 years. As part of that project, we did a big survey, we did a big experiment, and then we sat down and talked to people. And we talked to people because we wanted them to speak about immigration outside of the constraints that a survey or an experiment places on them. And those are great instruments for getting a broad sense of things, but we wanted them to be able to speak without those constraints. And we talked to Latinos, and we talked to Republican Latinos and independents and Democrats, foreign-born, US-born, undocumented, naturalized citizens. And we also talked to US-born white people from across the political and social class spectrum. And one of the themes that emerged is precisely the theme that Mary picked up on, the theme that I think Mary is asking us to consider, which is that we are more than the caricatures that we draw each other with. And one of the main points that we make in the book manuscript is that, yes, Republicans want more border security, and they are more prone to favor harsher enforcement, but they overwhelmingly support a pathway to citizenship and DACA and the Dreamers. And yes, Democrats and to a lesser degree independents think that border security should be less of a priority, and they're more likely to support the kinds of welcoming policies that exist in places like Arizona and New Mexico and Colorado, but they also believe there should be border security. They don't believe in open borders, and they too support a pathway to citizenship and the Dreamers. So there's some concentricity in the views of those people. And when you talk to people and let them speak openly, you see they have really complicated views about immigration, that they are more than the caricatures that we are likely to draw them in. And so that has actually given me some comfort. And now I think what we need to do as a nation is to sort of erase those caricatures and the ones that we draw each other with. And also, instead of harnessing the kind of worst in each other, let's see if we can harness the best in each other and maybe start with the kinds of things we agree on. And there are, in fact, things we agree on when it comes to immigration. And we'll get to this later, but I think they're some of the most important things about immigration policy today. And there's a surprising degree of agreement. And so I'll stop there.
Oh, thank you both so much. And I would like to believe that there are other people making remarks like this nationwide, but I don't have any reason to think that. So it leaves me all the more dazzled in it, and my good fortune at having the two of you here doing that. And if I turn out to be wrong, and if all the attendees want to tell me that there are thousands of these kinds of statements being made, that will be a surprise to me, but it will be a welcome surprise. So what we're going to go to now is the items of far more elaborate discussion than I gave you when I just trotted us through that slide. But we are going to have a set of remarks on why we chose these items to put in our takeaways. The party of practicality coming in for a landing and very explicitly saying, here are things we must note, and they are not things that we are shouting about. We're simply saying, pay attention to this and note the possibilities of really down-to-earth responses to these reckonings. So I don't know that the order of things that appeared on the slide is a very sacred order, but I think I had the border structures on there first. So Mary, would you like to talk about what we know worked in the past and what we know did not work in the past, and how we can apply that in the present?
Sure. one of the things I write a lot about in my book manuscript and in several book chapters and articles that I have published is that what we do certainly know is that building structures on the border to divert immigrants to more dangerous landscapes where they cross hasn't worked because they continue to cross the border successfully. And if they don't cross the border successfully, they are dying in the desert, which is a humanitarian issue. And it costs a lot of money. It's just a waste of money. We've built structures and they've been dismantled. Natural forces have destroyed them, floods, erosion, all kinds of other natural processes have eroded and just caused the fences to fall over. And so I write a lot about, and animals actually too, dig underneath. People dismantle them, as I think I just said that. So it's pretty much a huge waste of money. We've been building border fences since 1911 for different reasons. The first fences were actually built to control cattle crossing the border because there were some diseases that they were spreading north of the border. And I'm not going to get into the details of that unless people want to ask questions after in the chat if we have time. And then by the 1950s, we started using fences to control the movement of human beings. And we've been doing so ever since. And it's really, really interesting to see the ways in which policymakers and politicians from the 1960s to today have used border control as political platforms in political campaigns, right? So we need to get control of the border. And there's this notion, I think Tomas said this last time in our conversation, there's this, politicians use this phrase as if we've lost control, like we had control at one point, but we really never have, right? Control of the border has been elusive for forever. And in fact, we didn't really want to control the border until 1942, when we started a program called the Bracero program, which is a guest worker program, whereby the United States and Mexico agreed to collaborate to bring guest workers to the United States to fill labor gaps that were created by men going off to war during the Second World War. That program continued through 1964 because it was so successful in helping to develop agricultural businesses across the United States. And then it ended right before the United States passed the 1965 Immigration Act, which for the first time limited the number of people who could migrate from the Western Hemisphere into the United States. So it placed for the first time a cap on the number of people who could enter from Mexico, which many, many immigration scholars argue ultimately created the modern immigration problem. Because for years, the United States had institutionalized migration from south to north, and then suddenly cut it off and then put a limit on it. And so people in Mexico and from really Latin America had been used to coming north, but really, again, from Mexico, because that collaboration was between Mexico and the United States. And then suddenly nobody could come to the United States, or very few people, by quote unquote legal means. So people had to cross surreptitiously. Interesting fact that I actually just want to tell you because it's important to me is that the first border fences built to stop human migration were actually built to stop women, Mexican women, from crossing the border, because the Bracero program allowed men to come to the United States and work, but it didn't allow women, and increasingly women wanted to cross the border, and they tried to do it secretively or surreptitiously without sanction. People call that illegally. I don't like to use that word as an immigration scholar. And so they would try to do that in cities and urban places because they could easily blend in with the population once they did it. But when Border Patrol agents tried to apprehend these women in urban spaces, they would be seen chasing women and tackling them or apprehending them or arresting them. And they felt like people in the cities were watching them attack women. So they started writing to their supervisors and saying, we really need fences in urban spaces so that we can divert these women to the desert landscape and chase them and apprehend them there. So people can't see us. We feel like we're abusing women in front of people. So we'd really like to abuse women in the desert where nobody can see. So that's just an interesting piece of information for you. So again, the fences were easily dismantled. We keep wanting to build bigger and better fences. That's often something you see in the documents. And they haven't worked yet, and I think they won't. There's a lot of people who say, build me a 10-foot fence and I'll get an 11-foot or 12-foot ladder. That's something people say all the time. There have been images of fences with big ramps with vehicles driving over. I mean, there are all kinds of ways people will outsmart a static object in the middle of the desert or in the middle of a landscape. And so it's pretty much a huge amount of money, and it's destroying the natural environment. And I'll give you one other interesting fact. One study conducted a few years ago said that on average, 1,500 migrants pass through the Arizona-Sonora border daily, each leaving roughly 9 pounds of waste behind them. This totals roughly 13,500 pounds of garbage per day that's left in the Arizona-Sonora region alone. That's a lot of garbage, and you can't really blame migrants. It's hot. They're carrying stuff on their back to try and survive, trekking through this hot, arid landscape. I wouldn't want to carry extra weight on my back if I was trying to survive that. So you can't blame people for shedding weight when they're trying to cross this landscape. And so it's terrible for the environment. It's terrible for the humans trying to cross the border. And again, it's just a huge waste of money. I could go on forever with these kinds of facts, but I'll stop there.
That was illuminating and valuable and temperate and something to reckon with and not dismiss at all. So, Tomas, you have a number of the bullet points on our magic slide. So in whatever order or sequence or level of detail that you'd like here, could you walk us through those ideas?
Yeah, sure. So, Mary, thanks for those insights. This often happens to me when I'm in the presence of a really brilliant colleague, but they say something and I stop and think, man, I would really like to take their class. And that's certainly the case with Mary. So thank you. Yeah, so I think that probably the biggest priority when it comes to immigration right now, there are many priorities, but for me, the biggest priority is a mass legalization program. And that's a priority for me because I care a lot about immigrant integration. And I don't think there is anything holding back immigrant integration more right now than the undocumented status that roughly 11.5 million immigrants carry with them. And I said this last time, but I think it's worth saying again, that undocumented status is an impediment to integration, not only for the immigrants who carry that status, but for future generations. And there's really good research to show the socioeconomic effects are multi-generational, that the mental health effects are multi-generational, and that when people are able to legalize, it really lifts the kind of drag on integration that is undocumented status for 3 or 4 generations. And so, this is partly about political framing, but the framing, I think, reflects the empirical reality. And the framing, I think, should be that a legalization program is really a mass assimilation, integration, incorporation program. So I think it needs to be a really, really high priority. The median length of stay for an undocumented immigrant in the United States today is more than a decade and a half. So there's some semblance of integration that's happening already. Otherwise, you just wouldn't be able to stay for 16 years, which is the median length of stay. But that integration will always be stalled because of legal status. Relatedly, and this is another bullet point, is the kind of renewal of DACA as we knew it under President Obama. I mean, I would go a step further and say that, I should say in the short term, DACA is something that President Biden can reinstate very quickly. Right now, DACA exists still, but they're only accepting renewals of DACA and not new applicants. And I think it'd be really important to accept new applicants. And we know that DACA had a tremendous integrating effect on the individuals who received it. They earned more money, they were more likely to buy homes, they got more education, they were more likely to get married. It was, in essence, again, a de facto integration program, and it's not even a legalization program, it's just protection from deportation. It does allow individuals to get social security numbers, to get work permits, and that has a huge effect on their ability to fully participate in American society. And both DACA and a legalization program, I think we need to see them not just as benefits for the immigrants who receive them or their future generations, but they're benefits for all of us. These are really public goods. We are better as a nation when we can reap the benefits of the talent and the ambition that immigrants bring with them, and legalization does that for us. I mentioned a second ago, I'm marching through the bullet points. Is that what is that the plan here?
That is my dream. Yes.
Okay. And of course, as I march through these bullet points, the speed with which I march through them speaks to the ease with which all of these things will happen. And I'm being completely sarcastic. I think humor is helpful for a party of practicality, even though I'm the only one in this room who thinks I'm funny, but that's okay. I think we need to, and Patty, you mentioned this at the outset when we were going through our bullet points, but USCIS, the United States Office of Citizenship and Immigration Services, needs to kind of re-up its core task, which is to manage our visa system and our naturalization system. There's a huge backlog of people who've applied for citizenship and are just waiting to take the exam. And USCIS is running out of money. And part of the reason they're running out of money is because under the current administration, we've directed a number of the USCIS officers to investigate naturalization fraud, which is incredibly rare, incredibly rare. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just not sure that it's the wise place to put resources in an already cash-strapped agency. And so, again, this goes towards integration. I think we do better as a country when we are more inclusive of the people who are already here. And just to backpedal a little bit into the kind of core theme of the party of practicality, I think that and Mary, I'm left on the political spectrum, but I think that inclusivity needs to include people who are on the right. And so we need to practice what we preach. If we're calling for more inclusion, we need to call for more inclusion and in all its dimensions. So let me just bracket that. And then the other thing that we could do, and President Biden could do this very quickly, in fact, with the exception of a legalization program, you could do virtually all of these things with a stroke of a pen, but we need to readjust our priorities for apprehension, detention, and deportation. So these are sort of the little things that are not so flashy, but hugely influential in our immigration system, are things that happen through guidance memos that come down from the White House and the heads of agencies. And one of the guidance memos that came down early on in the Trump administration lifted the previous priorities for immigration enforcement under the Obama administration. Under the Obama administration, those priorities said that in the second half of the Obama administration, that they were going to go after people, undocumented immigrants, or people who had green cards, who had committed a serious crime. And that people who had only committed an immigration violation were very low, if not non-priorities for deportation under Obama. Under Trump, they lifted those priorities and basically said everybody was a priority for deportation. What that means practically is that if you go in to apprehend somebody who has committed a serious crime and somebody else in the household who has not committed a crime but has committed an immigration violation, can also get swept up in the deportation. These are called collateral. Can also get swept up in the apprehension. These are called collateral apprehensions. They are blunt instruments when you have just essentially a flat priority and everybody's a priority, and they send fear through not just immigrant communities, but also the US born children. Some of them are adults who live in those communities. And it has horrible negative effects that again reverberate into future generations. And then I think we can find alternatives to immigration detention. This is something we didn't mention in the slide, but something I do want to mention here that goes along with readjusting our priorities for immigration enforcement. But there's no reason that we should have 20 to 30,000 people locked up for months because of an immigration violation. And they call them immigration detention centers. They are, for all intents and purposes, prisons. And this is it is a huge expense. It is detrimental to our reputation around the world, and perhaps most importantly, it's detrimental to the dignity and the respect for humanity of the people who are in these detention centers. There is no reason we need to lock up people who have committed immigration violations. There are alternatives to, if we really need to track them, there are alternatives to tracking them that doesn't require putting them in prisons with prison guards and the host of abuses that goes along with that. And the final thing I think I'll say, Patty, is at the risk of going on too long here, having a long list of priorities, I think we need to return to our standing as a home for refugees and asylees. In the last few years, especially since the war in Syria and conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, we've seen the biggest refugee crisis since World War II. And we know what role the United States played in World War II as a kind of global citizen, doing our part and holding up our ideals as a liberal democracy, as a place where people could come and find a sense of freedom and opportunity. And we have just declined to play that role in the face of the greatest refugee crisis since World War II. We have shrunk our refugee and asylee population, new arrivals, basically down to zero. And to me, this goes back to something I said earlier about when we are at our best. We really live up to our ideals. We live up to the spirit of our founding documents when we're a home to people who seek refuge. And we know from our history that the people who have come here from various places around the world seeking that refuge have done well, and we have done well because they have been here. And so I'd like to see us return to practicing what we preach.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to read a quotation that both of you will probably know the origin of, but we're just going to torment our attendees for a moment on this in terms of the question, why are we called the party of practicality? And when we speak of bipartisan alliance and refusing the caricatures and so on, what does that entail? So I shall now read a quotation this was a statement made in 1962, and the attendees are all commissioned. We do have our little Q&A thing here. So if you think you have guessed the answer, you should put it in the Q&A, though my guess is that you're not going to get the answer. So, okay, so here it is. This is a statement from 1962 from a very prominent American. The Mexican border will become as the Canadian border by 2012, a free zone with the formalities and red tape of ingress and egress cut to a minimum so that the residents of both countries can travel back and forth across the line as if it was not there. Okay, so attendees, do you have guesses? Oh no, you're not guessing. Oh dear, look at you, you're not guessing. Why aren't you guessing? Because you know, because I already told you that you're going to guess wrong. That is not thought to be a great teaching technique, to tell people that they're going to get it wrong and then to go ahead and tell them that they should answer the question. So, okay, are you ready? Shall I tell you, attendees? You probably would like that. That was Barry Goldwater. And if you don't know the name Barry Goldwater, that was a silly remark too. So a very, 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 very prominent conservative. And that's what he said, that the Mexican border he thought was on its way to becoming equivalent to the Canadian border. And then some things intervened in that. Mitt Romney this morning. David Brooks in the New York Times quotes Mitt Romney, who is not exactly your rank and file Republican at the moment, but still really very much a conservative. David Brooks asked Mitt Romney, what do you think there are any practical things that legislators could agree on across a partisan divide? And Mitt Romney said, oh yes, there's several things. And one of them, he said, was to reactivate the intake for the DACA, for the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. So he put that in there. I'm sure if David Brooks had said, and would you consider including citizenship for veterans who have served in the military honorably, would you consider putting that in? I feel quite certain, not to speak for Mitt Romney, but I'm sure he would have said, well, sure, yes, absolutely. So those are things that just seem to reflect values that no party owns. No party can say that we're the only ones who honor the service, the civic duty of that. So it's not a pipe dream, really, this party of practicality thing. And we have some, kind of got Barry Goldwater's endorsement, which I'm not sure I would have gotten in his lifetime, but we got it now. So I want to just have you say whatever you'd like to say to each other now. In about 10 or 12 minutes, we'll bring in our younger folks as well. But just anything to each other in a conversation, and really, to the degree you want to do that, making the case for saying we are not using that word practicality lightly. That is actually a term that applies to what we are up to. So the floor is open for the two of you to do what you would like to do with conversation with each other, or just to assert why it is that we don't think we're having a fantasy here and seeing this as actionable.
I'll jump in if it's okay, Mary, to just pick up on that last question that Patty posed. So you'll have to forgive me if you hear opera singing in the background. My wife is an opera singer and she's teaching lessons right now. It's sort of the soundtrack of my life, and a lovely one at that. One of the reasons I think this is not a pipe dream is that public opinion is kind of on the side of the party of practicality. So Gallup poll, the Gallup organization has asked a nationally representative sample of Americans since 1965 whether they want immigration to be kept at its present level, increased, or decreased. And for the first time ever in 2019, they found that more people wanted immigration increased than decreased. It's about 28% want to see less immigration, 34% want to see more immigration, and 36% want immigration kept at its present level. So we're not exactly living in a country where people want to shrink the size of the immigrant population as dramatically as some of the recent proposals suggest. And I should mention that the increase is driven largely by Democrats and independents, but even Republicans over time, if you go back 18 years or so, have seen a steady increase in the share that wants more immigrants to come to the country. And I mentioned this last time, it's worth mentioning again, but large majorities favor a legalization program. Large majorities of Americans, provided that that immigrants go through a screening process, pay back taxes, promise to learn English. All of those are things that happen actually during naturalization anyway. But people do want something in return. They want to feel like when people claim the rights of citizenship, that they also take on the responsibilities. I mean, as an aside, I think that's something that we all need to do more right now, is embrace the responsibilities of citizenship and not just yell about what our rights are. But anyway, I just want to offer that up.
Great, thank you, Mary.
Yeah, and let's see, I have several points that I want to make in response both to Tomas and Patty, the quote that you just read. So I guess I'll start with a quote. I also want to throw a little bit of trivia out. There was a park created in San Diego called Friendship Park in, I believe, 1971. That was a park meant to foster good relationships between Mexicans and Americans. where people could play soccer and families could come together from families that were on, cross-border families, transnational families, and play. And it was created by Richard Nixon, also a Republican. And, we all know that Richard Nixon had other problems and issues. And so maybe people in the Republican Party don't want to necessarily embrace Nixon for other reasons. But a member of the Republican Party was very much in favor of creating a park that would foster a good relationship between Mexico and the United States, allowing people to cross the border freely and kick a soccer ball across the border and allow children to play soccer games and adults as well. And that park still exists, although there's a fence, a very big fence, actually 2 fences. Yeah. Patty, have you been there recently?
Ooh, no.
There was I don't know if when the WHA, Western History Association, met in San Diego, I went down. I don't remember if there was a field trip or not, but I certainly went down, and I also went several times in recent years. But there are actually 2 big fences now, but people are allowed. They open one fence every Saturday morning, I think, for a couple hours, and they allow people to go to the second fence, which has some openings, and they still let families talk across the fence. It's actually quite sad now, and I've seen families talking through the fence, but generally speaking, they don't let anyone even approach the fence. But during this time on Saturday mornings, they will let families go in the spirit of the original intent of that particular park. So the park still exists, although it's very, very, very different than its original intent. And so that's a really interesting point to make, right? That Republicans historically, both parties have really wanted to foster good relationships between both nations. Interestingly enough, also though, both parties have built fences along the US-Mexico border. Bill Clinton, at the same time that he passed NAFTA, and I said this in our last conversation, launched 3 big fence campaigns where he built fences in Arizona, Texas, and California. And so both of these things are bipartisan, but that leaves room for talking across party lines about both stopping construction and creating spaces for both nations to have different kinds of relationships than divisive ones. On the point of dignity and humanity that Tomas made, I think it is really important to think about ways to talk across, again, party lines and unify the parties to think about restoring that, right? As Tomas said, the United States has been a beacon of exemplary behavior as in the global world and being a global citizen, and we need to restore that reputation. And I think Republicans are very eager to do that with the new administration. We have essentially in the past 4 years created concentration camps along the US-Mexico border and separated families. I think there is still something like 500 families or 500 children that cannot find their parents. And so I am certain that there are some Republicans that are interested in restoring that kind of terrible reputation that the United States has made for itself. And then there's the issue of fiscal responsibility that I think appeals again to Republicans that Democrats can use to reach across the aisle and say, look, border structures they cost a lot of money. Detention centers and holding people in these detention centers are also very costly. This backlog of folks who are waiting to take their exams, this is all very costly. And another thing that we can argue with is that immigrants are great for the US economy. Not only is there this classic argument that they do jobs, that many of them do jobs that Americans don't want to do, but they also create new jobs because they have very diverse needs. And so they come and they're entrepreneurs and they open stores for I don't know, whatever it is that they need that isn't being sold in the communities where they decide to live. And so there are all of these arguments that could be made to appeal to Republicans if the new administration wanted to do so. And so that again goes back to the middle of the road where we could think about party of practicality, right? What is it that is a practical argument that could be made that appeals to both sides in order to get something moving?
Right, and I just have a couple of things I would put in here, and then we will bring up youth. We'll just bring up a new generation here to join us. Well, I don't know, you guys, okay.
I think we've already had youth up here. It's youthier. It's going to get
We're getting youthier. It's totally youthier than me. I got that part. But anyway, so we'll go there in a moment. But I did just want to say a word or two about a topic that we had in this initial line of thinking, which was going to be really, I mean, we certainly play the historian's card throughout this. And one of the things I have done in a public speech or two is note the way that the overland trail of the 1840s and 1850s in the United States, anyone trying to get from the eastern United States to the Pacific coast had to cross a desert. And that was fatal to some people and nearly fatal. The Humboldt Desert in Nevada was like another 5 miles, and the death rate would have been so much higher because the livestock had to be kept going and so on. Anyway, so I have been yearning to see that taken up more in public conversation, the way in which the overland trail of Americans in the mid-19th century and the westward movement, the desert crossing aspects are the human body experiencing intense thirst doesn't know ethnicity. At that point, there's nothing there about nationality. And the human suffering of someone who was close to dying or dying of thirst in the desert is so strong. So I've wanted to hit that point, not to hammer a point in there, but just to say, well, there's a historical echo in desert crossings, people looking for opportunity and crossing deserts to pursue that, and sometimes losing their lives in that. So the book that if I could just implant in everyone's hands who was receptive to this, I just keep returning to Luis Reyes' Devil's Highway, because it is a really well done book about some Mexican immigrants who died in the desert. And there are many humanizing elements of that book, and almost a little bit more anguish than a reader can take, even though you think, well, I'm just sitting here reading this and I could get a glass of water whenever I wanted to, but that goes out from under you in some parts of that book. And what I really wanted to accent is that book, I want that in people's hands because of the intense part of when the word comes out that some immigrants are in desperate shape, the Border Patrol shifts from we're going to seek them out and find them so we can arrest them and deport them. It shifts in an instant to search and rescue. And it's not people holding back in the least. And so to me, that is, now I'm tearing up again. Good Lord, this is getting bad here, but I do handkerchief. I had the handkerchief here for just these moments, but that is such an important reminder that the Border Patrol people are, many of them Latinos themselves, to get back to Mary's complexity, and they will save lives when that mission changes. So that there's something about that reckoning with the deserts, the way that you spoke of it, Mary, the way that the structures get built in places that send people out, where just the terrors of nature are supposed to be the policing agency there. But to see the Border Patrol people shift to the party of rescue is such a statement on the humanizing of this whole issue. So that's yeah, please, Mary.
Yeah, Patty, have I told you that I've written an essay about exactly what you just said? Every time you say it, it makes me think, did I tell Patty that I wrote this? The people going west from east to west in the United States in the 19th century and people traveling south to north. I have written an essay, basically it's called something Turnerian C, Americano no, Mexican immigrants, and something. And it basically is exactly that there's something about traveling east to west and immigrants becoming American that Frederick Jackson Turner touts as, you know, white American or white immigrants become American in this sort of struggle to move westward across the continent with nature. And I talk about this exact almost replica, but it's a different direction, and these people are a different color. Why don't they get to be American?
Yeah. Well, this is, what else are you hiding from me, Mary? What else are you?
Well, you'll read it eventually because it's a part of the mythology that you and I have talked about. But all of this to say, there's certainly something about race in here that absolutely needs to be discussed. And then the second point I wanna just echo and amplify is you're absolutely right about the Border Patrol, and that gets really complicated, as you said, because you're a Latino. But I also have an essay that talks about a particular migrant who is in a large group, and a woman he was with ended up hurting her knee. And they were traveling. It was very hot. It was a difficult journey. At some point they ran out of water and he had to drink his own urine, and it was just this agonizing, terrible story. And this woman hurt her knee, and he had become a little bit close with her as they had traveled and shared stories about their families and the struggle to pay the coyote to get them to travel north. And she hurt her knee and she couldn't go on anymore, and nobody could really carry her because they were all exhausted and tired. And so the coyote who was leading them said, "Look, we can't take you. You're going to have to stay here in the desert. I'm going to leave you with some paper to burn, and we're going to gather whatever wood we can find. And you're going to need to sit here, and you're going to need to wait about 5 hours. And after that time, or whatever you think is 5 hours, or after dark, light a fire, and the Border Patrol will come, and they'll rescue you.
Wow.
But you need to wait because you need to make sure that we're far enough away that they won't find us." And it was but the way he told the story, there are tears in his eyes, but you're absolutely right. And he assumes the Border Patrol did come and save her, but he felt terrible that they had to leave her because she couldn't really walk. So just an anecdotal story to echo what you just said.
Important story. And I'm thinking that we probably will want to post some sort of readings list for this. We certainly want Jerry Cadava's book and Tomas' books and these essays. And so we'll think of that. Okay, so attendees, stay with us here because we do have another 22 or 3 minutes, and we do want to go back over our excellent PowerPoint slide, of which there is only one PowerPoint slide. Oh, Tomas, sorry.
Patty, I just want to say one thing. Since we talked about Goldwater and Nixon, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't talk about Reagan and the fact that in 1986, he signed the Immigration Reform and Control Act, which is the biggest legalization program in the nation's history, legalized roughly 2.7 million undocumented immigrants. In his signing statement, then President Reagan said the legalization provision in this act will go far to improve the lives of a class of individuals who now must hide in the shadows without access to many of the benefits of a free and open society. Very soon, many of these men and women will be able to step into the sunlight and ultimately, if they choose, become Americans. That's Ronald Reagan. If Republicans look to a near holy figure in their party, it is Ronald Reagan, and he was all for legalization and what they call then, which is sort of turned into a 4-letter word now, amnesty.
And Alan Simpson, our Rocky Mountain wild person, who happens to be the funniest politician who has ever walked the earth, but he was the principal figure in that act of
with Ron Mazzoli.
So we are always we have had Alan Simpson with us at a couple of Center American West events, so we're not going to cheer up again over that. No, we're not going to do that, because Alan Simpson would make fun of me for the rest of my life if I started weeping about him on this. So okay, so now we are going to bring up with us, and again we have 20 minutes, and we are going to have the 2 law students who really, in the most bedrock way, made this happen. we will be joined by Anthony Vigil Martinez. He is a CU law student, and he is from Pueblo, Colorado, and he went, some odd school on the East Coast, I think begins with a Y or something. I know a little bit about myself. Anyway, so Yaley. And so I would not have met him because there is no Yaley network that I would have been a part of on that. But Lorenzo Trujillo, who so brought this together, was the one who said to Anthony and said to me, you two must meet. We met. I had oh my Lord, a very old proposal for an immigration event that had just languished in a lost file for, well, literally years. And chatting with Anthony, I mentioned that, dug it out. He looked at it. He went and met with the other law students at the Latinx Law Student Association. And here we are. So I guess the good news for scholars is that if you have a proposal that has been sitting around doing nothing for 8 or 9 years, I wouldn't give up on that. I would just say, find an Anthony Vigil Martinez equivalent, and then you will be moving. So Anthony will join us in a moment, and then also Tomas Manriquez Hernandez will join us. He is a CU law student, and he has been a crucial figure in our work on this project as well. And he is also a Marine. So I'm not saying that I have reached any new peak of being well organized in this project, but I have always known that if I really started to lose my capacity to put one thing in front of the other and do it in the right order and accomplish things, I knew that I had a person I could turn to who would get me in better operating order. So we're very fortunate to have somebody who is engaging in the most remarkable form of public service and civic duty and joining the military. So here they are. There they are. Look at that. There they are. I knew they would up here, and they did. So Anthony Vigil Martinez and Tomas Manriquez Hernandez, and they will say a little bit about themselves and how this topic how this figures in their lives and their priorities. And then they will, Anthony wrote our draft for the veterans legalization dream, hope, practical project. And Tomas wrote the equivalent statement for DACA, for the deferred, well, we all know what that is. Okay, so DACA and the Dreamers and how to do the right thing there. So they will speak about their own involvement in this issue, and then they will, each of them will also speak about their thinking on these very practical, low-hanging fruit. This could happen. This will happen. Proposals. So whichever order you prefer.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in then. And Patty, thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the other panelists as well. So, hello everyone. I'm Tomas Manriquez Hernandez. I'm a 3L along with Anthony at the University of Colorado Law School. And on top of that, as Patty mentioned, I had the honor of finishing Officer Candidate School this past summer and became a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. My reason for being here is inextricably linked to my background, because I'm the son of immigrants and I was just born in this country by chance. You see, my parents were farmers in Michoacan, Mexico, when a local cartel decided to beat my father nearly to death. And with that impetus, my mom decided right then that she was going to cross the border 6 months pregnant with me. And that's just how I came to be born in Denver, Colorado. Luckily enough, my father was now a citizen and my mom is a permanent resident. My dad's a citizen because of the Immigration Reform Control Act that Reagan instituted. But this makes it all the more heartbreaking to see the images of bodies of children and their parents floating in the Rio Grande. And it's a crude game of chance with dire consequences to attempt to cross the border. But immigrants are all too willing to play the game because even a glimmer of hope is better than facing the violence, the rape, death, or somehow something worse back home. And it's been a long journey to get this, JD. I'm nearly there, but it's been fraught with losing my friends to violence and drugs in the rough neighborhoods I grew up in. It's cost me hearing about my parents being verbally and physically abused and me being too young or too powerless to defend them. But the hardest thing of all has always been studying and working, thinking I'm working the hardest I could, just to see my parents come home ragged and beat down, to hug me with their bleached and jagged hands from decades of janitorial work for the sole purpose of just granting me and my little brother a better opportunity here. And so that's I guess why I'm here. I want to fight the good fight, and I want to give because now I have the ability to do so. So I think I was getting a little choked up there, but we're all good. So part of that power that I reference now comes with recognizing that there are people that are opposed to immigration, folks who voted Republican recently, and people that look like me and voted Republican recently. But instead of shying away behind hurt feelings or feelings of betrayal, I want to take a page out of Professor Mendoza's book here, and I want to engage. Anthony and I want to engage these thoughts, and I think it's a sentiment that a lot of other young people can jump on board with. Now more than ever, we've seen the effects of treating entire people as monoliths for certain ideas, and we need to get rid of it. Anthony and I predicated our work on the assumption that, as dangerous as it may be, that people are reasonable and they want to get things done. The party of practicality, right? So we identified veterans and dreamers as the highly sympathetic populations that both the left and the right could agree on in terms of granting citizenship. And at least that's the hope. My work focused on, once again, expediting the process for citizenship for active duty veterans and allowing these folks to grant citizenship to their immediate family. All of this, which was done away with under the Trump administration, and as I'm sure Professor Jimenez can cover or has covered in part already. But I did this because I believe that if you're willing to bleed for the stars and stripes, your citizenship should be granted to your spouse and to your children as well, bar none. And when you're willing to fight for your country while others are dodging the draft, I think your commitment is unquestionable. And your contribution is absolute, undeniable. And if I had to come up with ideal legislation, it would be just that, and other pathways to citizenship for folks like my parents. Citizenship for the essential workers that did not stop working when the rest of the world shut down a couple months ago. Folks like janitors, folks like my mom and dad, right? Field workers, and healthcare workers. I'm excited to see, honestly, what we can do with the support of Professor Jimenez and Professor Mendoza. I'm excited to see what happens when people like Congressman Joe Neguse and Senator Bennett potentially champion these changes. And yeah, but that's all I have. Thank you for the time, Patty. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone who tuned in, and thank you to the panelists. I think Anthony here can finish it off.
Thank you so much, Tomas. Anthony.
So as Patty mentioned earlier, my name is Anthony Vigil Martinez. I am also a 3L at the University of Colorado Law School. And I'm incredibly proud to have helped bring this event together, working with Tomas Manriquez, the Center of the American West, Lorenzo Trujillo, and as well as our remarkable panel of academics and Congressman Neguse. The perspective I bring to this topic is somewhat atypical as far as motivational drivers go. My Mexican heritage comes from individuals who have been living in modern day Southern Colorado and New Mexico since before the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. But I firmly believe that short of what we often misrepresent as our criminal justice system, it is immigration law that most often pits the powerless against the awesome dominion of the government. And in no small part due to the immigration policies of the Trump administration, Latinos have become the most incarcerated minority in this country. And yet no population is more vital, as Tomas mentioned just a moment ago, to the survival of American industry, be it the healthcare industry, small business, or entrepreneurship. And so I share the urgency of all of us here to find some common sense solutions to the country's division over immigration policy. It is encouraging to think that we are far more unified than it might seem after an historically divisive 4 years. Americans value highly the contributions of DACA recipients to our society, as much as we honor the unquestionable patriotism of immigrants who have fought and died in every single one of America's wars. And so it is imperative that we heal the wound opened by America's refusal to grant the citizenship so many have already earned. For those reasons, I think all of us here feel that governing by executive order in this area, at least in part, is not nearly as divisive as one might expect. Our communities, indivisible along make-believe lines such as citizen and immigrant, hunger for and are unified by the notion of equal rights for those who have paid so much back to our nation. I've also been asked by Patty to share a kind of dream immigration reform. And so I'm going to return briefly to America's immigration's unfortunate similarity to the criminal law. Right now, roughly 1 million immigration cases of varying types are pending in the federal immigration courts. Many of these cases carry the possibility of, as Professor Jimenez noted, pre-adjudicative detention or ultimately removal from the country. In addition, the obvious parallel between immigration detention and incarceration, removal often results in very real danger to those forced to return to their home countries. These are consequences equal to, and in some cases more grave, than those faced by citizens accused of criminal activity. In 2019, funding for US Customs and Border Protection and US Immigration and Customs Enforcement was raised to a whopping $22.5 billion, 22% higher than the 2017 enacted level. And yet only 37% of immigrants can afford a lawyer to plead their case. That number, in fact, gets smaller for detainees, dropping to just 14%. In 1963, the US Supreme Court decided a landmark case of Gideon v. Wainwright, mandating that all who are faced with a serious criminal allegation be provided with an attorney if they could not afford one. It is, to me at least, as self-evident now as it was when the Supreme Court decided Gideon, that in such an adversarial system as our immigration proceedings, that any person hailed into court who is too poor to hire a lawyer cannot be assured a fair proceeding unless counsel is provided for them. And so my dream reform would see $10 billion of the funds currently used for CBP and ICE enforcement reappropriated to create a national federal immigration defense system. While this might seem like an unrealistic proposition on its face, I believe that most Americans see the financial responsibility inherent in paying money over the short term in order to drastically reduce the costly immigration litigation in this country opens each year. Making the process fair ensures that common sense cases can be resolved quickly, either in favor of the individual immigrant or not, so that courts can focus on those cases which actually present novel questions of law. Attending to these cases with more care, I feel, is a far better and cost-effective use of an immigration judge's time as well. And so to close up with my statement, I'm just very grateful for the few minutes allotted to Tomas and to myself in this forum. I'm grateful to Congressman Neguse for his dedication to the challenges we face and for his listening ear, and especially to Professor Limerick on behalf of CU's Latino Law Student Association for putting immigration on the remarkable platform we've had today and back in October. And I am very, very intrigued by and dedicated by the work we are dedicating ourselves to in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodness, if I had thought about going to law school when I was a kid, but I wouldn't have held up to the competition, I think, listening to this. Just good heavens, what? Well, okay, I mean, my career turned out fine. I have no regrets about that, but those were spectacular remarks. And at the time I would have been going to law school, I just cried all the time and did not have the presence anywhere near that we have seen here. So thank you so much for that. We do have just a couple of minutes we have questions here. And first of all, I should say that one person did guess Eisenhower, and it was Goldwater, but and I guess Eisenhower is not so surprising to me in some ways, but it was a good guess, and I like that. We have the comment. I can do this very quickly, and then we'll have just a couple of remarks before we Oh no, Tomas, come back. Oh, don't go away, Tomas. Okay, so we have, in response to Mary's comments, we have the remark that it is so sad that consideration of human life can't be the only factor, that we must also think of economics, waste of money on fences, trash. And this person also found your remarks on the history of border crossing. This is Jennifer Hall Bowman, to be really, really interesting. So if you could do something to make human life outweigh factors, personally, I'm going to say I think use everything we have. But the question was not to me, interestingly enough. So Mary, why don't you say what you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, I certainly wish that we could. And I think, I wish that we could actually use the entire socio-ecological system. And what I mean by that is to think holistically about humans and the environment together. We're destroying so many habitats to very sometimes rare or almost endangered species, in addition to killing thousands of people every year, hundreds of people every year, depending on what part of the border you're talking about. And so, yes, if we could, I think we should use everything we've got, because for some people, they're thinking only about the natural environment. And what I mean by that is separate from humans. And then there are people who are arguing for the humanitarian reasons. And if we could get those people in a room together, it might be incredibly powerful. And, one of the things I argue for a lot is getting those people together and using everything, as Patty said, that we have.
That's great. And then we have Salitha Isaacson, who also guessed Eisenhower, pointing out that Carne y Arena is a wonderful virtual reality art display that brings the struggles of people crossing the desert and their stories of why they came. It is so moving and informative. So if we put together future resources, then we might have that. And then to Tomas Manriquez Hernandez, we have a comment. I'm deeply touched by your story, Tomas. It's an honor to hear your story. Thank you for bringing a piece of you and your, oh goodness gracious, here we go again. Okay. Thank you for bringing a piece of you and your family to us here today. So it was very moving, and we really appreciate that. And then we have the question from our wonderful participant, Alita Bourne. The issue is the extreme positions of the Congress people. How do we get them to the position of the majority of the Americans?
It's hard.
I think, though, as I said in the very beginning of our gathering here today, I have parents who think in very different ways than I do. And one thing that I have learned to do is to use their own language, right? To pull them over to my side whenever I can. And so I would say, right, like I was talking about earlier, fiscal responsibility, or, right, if we're wanting to persuade folks in one direction or another, Tomas talked about listening at our last gathering. One of those things is listening to the kinds of things that they care about. And then if we're wanting to pull people to one side or another, listen, and figure out what people care most about, and then find ways to appeal to those concerns with our own interests, and then find ways to compromise and get to the practical core that is the middle ground. And that's what I would say is the best way to do it.
That seems very good.
Last time when we met, something like this topic came up, and I did mention the research done by my fabulous colleague at Stanford, Rob Willer, who studies political persuasion. And what he studies is exactly what Mary just said, in terms of using values of conservatism to frame policies that essentially we all agree on, but agree more on them when they're framed according to our worldview. So if you think about, the catastrophe of people dying coming across the border, I mean, there's a pro-life agenda there if you want to not see people die. If you're pro-family, the notion that the state would forcibly separate parents from their children is totally anti-family. I mean, I'm not one to use hyperbole, and this is not hyperbole. I mean, I think it's state-sponsored child abuse. If you're pro-family, and that's a kind of core tenet of Republican ideology, then you can't be in favor. You have to be in favor of a policy, a humane immigration policy that keeps families together. So,
yeah. And certainly veterans would be another.
yeah, and veterans. And by the way, we should also say 2 days past Veterans Day to Tomas. Thank you for your service.
Yes, and in fact, I think we should ask Tomas
Yeah,
and
turn your
Anthony to
camera.
come back on so that they can be there for the great moment when I put the slide back up and all of our goals are just laid out there. This is going to be very moving when that slide comes back up. And I will say that there it is. I will just finish by just reminding you that this is not pie in the sky. This is not pipe dream attendees and participants. We are really on our way somewhere. And then I would like to say that the causes, I have been very privileged to get involved with the Student Veterans Association on campus and the office there. And the fact that we continue to fight wars, the nation has not been at peace for a couple of decades. And we are so often as civilians oblivious to the service of veterans. There is another case where our inattention to what just is so fitful with veterans. We pay attention and then we don't. And long spells go and then we do. And then we say, thank you for your service. And then we move on. So these subjects are so joined, I think, with this initiative to bring, to ensure citizenship for veterans. And if I believe our nation can rise to that, I believe that our nation can do that. And I'm so proud and happy to have ended up with such excellent comrades. I want to, this slide is just going to become very popular and we'll have it up on our website and people will just be wanting to download that all the time. But the slide can go away now so that the audience can see the participants and can join me in thanking these presenters who have been just a spectacular team of people to work with. And if I seem to be a little bit bewilderingly cheerful at times, this would be why. I mean, these are the people that I get to associate with. And I think I actually have a pretty good just physiological setup for cheerfulness, I guess. But I will say the last year or so has not really fostered that physiological characteristic so much. But this has been a wonderful team to work with. And I'm so in debt. And in olden days, in physical settings, we could do a standing ovation at this point for our presenters. And all we can do is sit in the stupid chair that we sit in all the time and just say, as soon as we can materially do that, we'll reunite you and we'll all stand up and clap for you. So thank you so much. And we'll move forward. And the congressman is on pins and needles waiting for our results. So that'll be it. Thank you attendees very much for your company and don't be strangers. Everyone stay in touch.